Welcome to another episode of Untold. Today we're going to get to explore the mind and body in an amazing way. I'm your host, Lujane Al-Athari.
And I'm your host, Abdullah Hindiani. And like I said, Lujane, for today's episode, we have Somatic practitioner Sulaiman Alqattan. So if that field is very interesting to you, stay tuned until after the break. And we're back with Sulaiman Alqattan. I want to first welcome you for being our guest on today's episode of The Untold.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. So yeah, nice to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you too. And you're a somatic practitioner. And what I want to start off, because I think a lot of people watching may not know what that is. So could you first of all explain what that is and what somatic work is?
Sure, somatic work might sound very new to a lot of people, but it actually goes back and is very ingrained into ancient culture, tradition, and history. It seems alien today because the standard form of therapy is usually CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a very important piece of the puzzle, I would say personally, because it relies a lot on analysis, on the kind of cognitive part of the mind to solve mental health issues, so on and so forth. But somatic work turns the attention towards the body, towards deeper parts of the mind. Some people like to call it the subconscious, unconscious mind, which includes the body, which includes the nervous system, and targets that at a deeper level, we could say. So
what drove you initially to, be fascinated by the mind enough to pursue studying it, understanding it, and then to actually help people understand it on your level?
yes, I used to struggle with mental health issues. I was diagnosed with a mental illness. I used to have chronic physical issues. These are things that were detrimental to my life, and I struggled with them for, I think, up to like 6-7 years, right? There's different phases. I don't know if you guys want to go into the details, but yeah, that kind of suffering, first person, going through it myself, forced me to go on this journey of trying to heal it, albeit being alternative ways. But I mean, I'm a pragmatist, so whatever works works, and if CBT works for certain people, that's okay. But for me, I needed certainly what's called alternative means. Again, only alternative compared to the traditional means, but by no means does that mean that it's not effective or integral or useful to human health. So yeah, just to answer the question, it was my personal journey that reeled me into doing this kind of work.
I mean, that's so interesting. And even how you said it's alternative. Back in the day, it was considered the traditional method, wasn't it? Like it was the standard before we got modern medicine and all that stuff. And I do think I'm seeing a lot of recurrence these days of people going back to the older ways to understand their bodies and their mental health, especially somatic practices, which a lot of people may not be aware of is how a lot of things are stored in the body. Like, was it part of your own journey that made you realize that a lot of things are being stored in the body that the mind can't process?
Absolutely. It's one thing to analyze and know logically, everything that happened to you and say, okay, I want to logically change this behavior. I want to logically not feel as angry or as sad or as, rageful towards my parents or the people that I hate. And I want to forgive and all these things. But we're talking about different forms of intelligences here. And usually with that kind of method, it's not really effective. That person that practices and prioritizes that part of the mind, they realize very quickly that as soon as their emotions take over or their nervous system, it's a different story, right? So I usually tell my clients, like, emotions and the nervous system, they don't speak the language of logic, right, that we usually speak. And to speak within language that we're speaking right now, that requires kind of like a logic, analytical kind of mind. But yeah, as the philosopher David Hume says, reason is the slave of passions. So yeah, that should be the main target in terms of, I think it all goes down to the way our brain works. It's going to be a little bit of a long answer, but it's important. Yeah. So we have two brain hemispheres. We have the left and the right hemisphere. And, usually there's a lot of information online about, this one is for creativity, this one's for mathematics and logic, so on and so forth. Most of that is usually very surface level or just not based on peer-reviewed scientific literature. The real story about it comes from Dr. Ian McGilchrist, right? He's a philosopher, he's a psychiatrist who has written extensively about how the hemispheres work. Just to simplify everything, the left hemisphere attends to the world where it tries to understand it analytically and through abstraction, right? And the Latin word for abstract literally means to pull away, just to dissociate from the thing in order to understand it. So it's not direct knowledge of something, but it's knowledge about something, right? And this comes in the form of language, cognitive concepts, right? You can speak a lot about something in an abstract cognitive manner, but that doesn't mean you have direct knowledge of it. This is where the right hemisphere comes in. Right hemisphere is much more vertical in nature than the left hemisphere, in the sense it's much more in tune and in touch with reality in a way that the left hemisphere is just absolutely not. And this is backed up by several scientific peer-reviewed studies, brain lesion studies, even studies involving schizophrenia, who show like a hemisphere imbalance in people. So just to sum it all up, the right hemisphere deals with embodied knowledge, with direct experience with reality. The left hemisphere deals with abstraction, which by its very nature pulls you away from what is happening. Ian McGilchrist explains that modernity, especially this has happened after the Industrial Revolution, has shifted our culture in a very left hemispheric way, where our external environment essentially reflects the reality of the left hemisphere. So a lot of it is about analytical abstraction. If you just take a look at our school system, the way university works, the way our job system works, a lot of it is based heavily on cognition, right? On this kind of like left hemispheric, analytic, abstract form of knowledge, as opposed to direct knowledge of things. So for Ian McGilchrist, he says that by default, modernity, which includes all of its several factors within health, bureaucracy, all the way down to the individual, is making people more left hemisphere biased. How does this translate to the body? The left hemisphere simply, this is through lesion studies, does not know how to feel and get in touch with the body. So people, for example, who have right hemisphere damage, which means only their left hemisphere is working, they literally ignore parts, their left side of their body. Like they'll look at their left hand, because the left hemisphere is connected to the right side of the body. They will look at their left hand and say, oh, that's not my hand. You know,
Oh, wow.
they'll say like, oh, that's your hand. You know,
Oh, that's
they will
crazy.
completely deny the left side of their body. Even on the right side, they'll treat it as a machine. They'll say, oh, this isn't part of me. I don't need to feel into it. It's just something I use. The left hemisphere is obsessed with utility, right? So just to bring all this back, we essentially, like the modern human, obviously I'm generalizing, we can say treats their bodies. I mean, this is certainly something I could relate to, but we treat our bodies kind of like fancy sports cars with like nice sound systems, you know? It's not really something I'm going to connect to and like feel into, like it's truly a living organism. No, it's usually treated as like, oh, it gets me from point A to point B. How do I do this more efficiently? Or complete neglect. So it's a long-winded answer, but I think it's important. Yeah.
No, it is, because it's quite informative. I feel like that really encompasses a lot of different things, and it shows us from the science point of view how it affects the body. And like you said, emotions are not reasonable. Like, we feel them. They're not made through thoughts so much. I mean, thinking can repeat the emotions and keep it stored in the body longer. But one of the big issues, I think, in the modern world is we're not feeling our emotions the way we're supposed to be. So could you tell us a bit more about how people need to kind of regulate themselves?
Very complex, and it takes a lot from the environment. I think the best way to assess, like under a medical kind of model, how to assess a human being is the biopsychosocial model, right? So look at what the biological, psychological, and social inputs are for the human being. All these things play a big part. For me right now, I'm focusing on the somatic part, the nervous system, getting in touch with the emotions, how to regulate the nervous system, how to remain in a calm, meditative state as opposed to being very reactive, healing trauma, so on and so forth. So yeah, I would say somatic therapy is a great start for people who want to get in touch more with emotions. Again, it's certainly not the only way. There are so many different things I could mention that will get someone definitely in touch with their emotions. One is like proper social activity, proper social bonds. A healthy social life will make a person more sensitive to those emotions, we can say. But yeah, I think somatic therapy is a great start. I think with things like meditation, it can be a little bit abstract for people. Like, okay, you sit in a room and you just watch your thoughts, but like somatic therapy is much more practical. It gives you a guide onto like what to feel, and you can apply it to different emotions and so on and so forth. So I think anyone that's struggling with regulating difficult and heavy emotions, I think any kind of traumatic incident, stress is a big one. How to properly deal with stress, not in a way that's like you're neglecting your body, but actually learning how to regulate the stressors and understand where you are, and taking proper action afterwards. Um, so yeah, if anyone's struggling mentally, but also if you have a chronic disease that's persistent and does not seem to have clear reasons or evidence as to why you have this chronic disease, whether it's in the gut, whether it's in the digestive system, the immune system, all these different things actually can lead back to emotional issues, emotional suppression. I'm mainly referring to the work of Dr. Gabor Mate, who essentially connects mental and physical illness together because the body is an integrated system. These things are not separate. If you do have an issue one part of the system, it can cause downstream effects in other parts. So it's very broad. To me, again, call me biased. I think everyone should have some type of practice, especially if you're a modern human, which I'm sure everyone listening to this is. Um, yeah, to have some type of like embodiment practice. Yeah.
I think that's a really great idea, and I love how you managed to draw these things together because it does make a lot of sense, especially the idea of the mind and body being connected in everything because we are a whole. And I'd love to discuss this further, but we are going to go on a short break, and I hope we can dive into this matter some more. So stay tuned for after the break.
And we are back. Thank you for joining us from the break. I want to ask you about something because in the first part of the interview, you've highlighted the idea of the left and the right hemispheres and how they both have their own role in the structure of the human body. But I want to ask you, is there an overlap? Is there an overpowering element? Is one side taken over from the other? Like, what is the ratio of control there?
Definitely. So the hemispheres, the way Ian McGilchrist explains it, are asymmetrical by nature, right? So they don't have this kind of like equal balance relationship. The left hemisphere is much more associated with power, manipulation, control in a very direct sense. It usually, like if we were to use vision as an example, it sees things in an environment by isolating things into small parts and hyperfixates on one aspect of the environment. This is because evolutionary, it tracks back to predatory kind of relations or interactions. So if you think of a predator like an owl or an eagle, they're going to focus on that little prey and ignore the whole of the picture and just focus on that one thing. Whereas the right hemisphere is much more associated with prey relations and vision. So it's more panoramic. It has to pay attention to the entire picture in order to survive and to make sense of things. Now that's just one example, but in general, we can say that they're asymmetrical because the left hemisphere, by its very nature of being obsessed with power and manipulation, it is also obsessed with denial. It operates through denial and it takes out things, right? So the interaction, the relationship between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere is the left hemisphere rejects the right hemisphere view, right? And the right hemisphere has a much more all-encompassing and takes into account the left hemisphere, right? So it's not left or right, or sorry, it's not black or white. It's taking them together, the right hemisphere. So yeah, in his book, The Master and His Emissary, that's why he calls it The Master and His Emissary. The master is the right hemisphere, the much more wise part of the brain. The emissary is the left hemisphere, much more powerful than the master, but the master is powerful in a different way where it has depth and wisdom. So the master sends the emissary to go do practical things in the world for the master. But because the emissary is hubristic and it is arrogant, it thinks it can do away with the master. And that's essentially the relationship between the hemispheres, as the master and the the master and the emissary must remain in harmony together. It is only when the left hemisphere dominates and becomes hubristic that it takes over the right hemisphere, and then they both essentially die off. So
That's so interesting, especially the idea that the right brain is kind of meant to be the master more over the left brain. And as you said, in the modern day, we've become more left-brained and logical over other stuff. So would you say that's part of the problem of why a lot of people experience chronic stress all the time? Is it due to how the modern life, how we live in it?
I think it's definitely a big pointer in the right direction. I don't want to reduce all of chronic modern stress to the hemispheres. But yeah, there's so many different factors that affect the way we deal with stress today and why it's so prevalent. And one of them is just how radically different our environment is at the moment compared to what our bodies are evolved, let's say, or are used to or are adapted to having, right? So if we think of the cradle of human civilization, all of humans, at least 15,000 years ago, used to live in hunter-gatherer tribes. And in these hunter-gatherer tribes, I'll just give you one example of how stress was much more regulated. Yes, we had dangers that, we lived in nature and in the wild. So dangers were all around. We had to be aware of them. We probably had life or death threatening very high peaks of stress pretty frequently, much more than the modern human, right? But with these peaks, and when a person survives that, there's certainly a lot of scientific evidence that shows that when a person is within closely knit groups, right? We're social creatures, right? We need to be within groups, and hunter-gatherer tribes are usually estimated to be in the past between 15 to like 40. That's it. That's how big the hunter-gatherer tribe was, okay? So these were very close-knitted communities. When you go through a very stressful event like that, as a collective, it brings people together. This is known as the inside or outsider or insider effect, right? When there's a common enemy, usually what happens is a group comes together and they become more cohesive and harmonious. So imagine these huge peaks of stress that you're going through with your loved ones all of the time. That actually is a potent regulator of stress, right? When you come to the modern world, our environment has transformed in just a completely alien way. I mean, through the agricultural and the industrial revolution, our environment is very different in the sense of we're much more fragmented, right? We're not as connected in that kind of like tribal manner. We usually relate to either online communities or the state or these very kind of like abstract, open things. So even though there's more people around, our sense of social connection, I would say, has diminished to a huge degree. So yeah, social connection is a huge social stress regulator, a very potent stress regulator. And yeah, I would say that's one of the biggest factors is the social environment that we currently inhabit as modern humans, but also our relationship to stress, right? We don't really have these huge stressors. And I'm not saying telling people to go do dangerous things, although something like cold exposure or like high intensity exercise in sports, these things are ingrained in us to actually calm us down later throughout the day, to have these big high peaks and then to survive them, allow the body to regulate that stress, which allows it to get rid of this kind of like chronic form of stress. I'm oversimplifying a lot, but that's my answer.
Yeah. I also want to take the conversation to a different topic where you also highlight and show the importance of how there's a lot of loneliness epidemic going around, the idea of isolation from a lot of people. So I want to bring your conversation toward that point. Like, why do you think that's such an important topic to bring to light?
Why is that such an important topic to bring to light? I think, as a person who's experienced loneliness, I'm sure everyone experiences it, especially in the modern age. It's a big issue because it leaves you out of such an important part of the human experience. I mean, I can't think of any other reason why we are here other than to truly connect, not just with oneself, with others, with nature. All of these things are incredibly crucial, and to be lonely is associated with suffering, obviously. I don't have to explain it away. Whoever is lonely knows that
Yeah.
It doesn't feel great. In terms of why it's happening, how can we approach overcoming it? Again, giving a really oversimplified general answer. Yeah, we live under, with Ian McGilchrist's view, in a left hemispheric world. Modernity is a left hemispheric world. It's the left hemisphere's world pulled out and embodied into our environment. And the left hemisphere works through division. It cuts things into tiny little parts. In fact, I'm pretty sure the etymology of the word analysis is to cut up, right, into little pieces. So that's how it operates by definition. When this spreads out towards every single facet of life, it applies to social relations and to social bonds. I mean, individualism is at war with these kind of tribalistic cultural. That's just one example of how modernity has shaped us to be way more individualistic. This obviously comes from the philosophy and culture from the Enlightenment in Europe, which transformed the entire world. This is in the 1500s, the 1600s. Individualism, all of these things have flourished in the West, have spread out in the West, and are now being imported to different countries, right? Most countries are being forced into modernity. So these effects of cutting up the social bonds and being more individualistic is here and with us. This is probably something, in terms of Kuwait, I'm not sure if our ancestors really experience loneliness and individualism to this extent. I think it's probably safe to say much less than what we have right now. Yeah.
Well, it makes sense because we come from a more community-based country. Like family plays a big role, having your community and people. And it was really
Yes.
interesting to me to hear how you said that community and social bonding is one of the best ways to regulate and to have a better nervous system. That's something I actually didn't know about, especially I think because today, the way that modernity goes is there's a lot of isolation. It's a lot of individual over the
Yeah.
collective all
Just
the
think
time.
of like you in your house where you have this like concrete wall surrounded by it. You can go in and lock the door and just sit there
Yeah.
for a whole day or for whatever. Obviously your family's gonna check in on you, but like our hunter-gatherer ancestors did not have that. It was just out and open and in the wild. I'm not
True.
saying there wasn't privacy, but it's so easy to separate
Yeah.
and to just isolate. You see what I mean?
I
Yeah.
get it. It's
Yeah,
also they were always kind of having to hang out together. Like every day they might gather, tell stories over a fire,
exactly.
do something.
Exactly.
Like everything was always out in the open. Whereas
100%.
now you just go online and you lock your door. So
Exactly.
even though we have so much connection, there's actually more disconnection.
100%.
It's a oxymoron almost.
100%. Yeah. And those parasocial relationships online have tried to replace
Yeah.
actual social connection, but it fails. That's the hubris, I would say, of the left hemisphere. It thinks it could just replace these things that are properly integrated in context and say, oh, I could just replace this and do something more efficient. So, yeah.
I love how that's the irony of today's world is that connection has never been easier, right? To find some person, you don't have to go to lengths to find them. They are just one click away, and yet disconnection has never been more apparent in all society, in all households. I think that's a curse of the beauty of the modern age.
Definitely. I'm not against modernism. I'm not against all these different things. We're progressing, I would say, but we can't be hubristic. We can't just forget our past and our roots. We need to kind of like integrate these things with the modern life because this is all an experiment in the end. The only way to know how to move forward is to figure out what things have gone wrong, right? And I think the prevalence of chronic illness, chronic stress, mental illness is a huge pointer to what we actually need, what's deep rooted in our nervous systems and our biology, to integrate that with modernity, not leaving out modernity and living in a cave or something, which is what some people do.
Honestly, I agree with what you said because I do think the balance is what we need to find because our bodies have not yet caught up to where the modern world is, especially our nervous systems. So I want to thank you for shedding light on this because I think it's such an important thing to talk about, especially nowadays. And I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thanks. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
No, it was so interesting for real.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, I do want to thank you, tremendously for joining us on the Untold. The human body, the brain is such a fascinating organ for me. It's such a device of fascination and intrigue for me, and I can always spend hours listening to conversation about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you guys. You guys were great.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
And you were also great. And with that, we are going to go on a short break. And we're back. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I know that I did. I love talking to him. He's so interesting with everything I say about the mind and the body, the subconscious. I feel like I learn something new whenever we do have these kind of talks. And I love knowing about how the mind and body are so connected together in this way.
He is, mashallah. Sulaiman is very informative. He's very knowledgeable, and even off camera, he was kind enough to disclose with us so many different aspects about the mind, the human body, the fitness, well-being, and how they all interconnect. You know, the idea of your body being two hemispheres and how they overlap. The idea of mental being, how it's hugely influential on our environment. He was an amazing person to talk to.
I agree. And I love how, even though he's doing somatic practice, which is considered alternative medicine, he has everything backed by science, by peer review, and just knowing about how modern culture has such an effect on our mental and physical well being and the things that we can do to kind of slow down and just sort of become more at one with who we are and maybe have less problems. I think it's something everyone should pay attention to.
Yeah, very well said, Lejane. We've had tremendous time talking to him. I hope the audience felt the same. With that in mind, that's the end of today's episode of The Untold. Until the next one, goodbye for now.
Goodbye and see you next time.